everybody. Welcome back to the IzzyVerse. My guest for today is a legendary creator, editor, writer. He's been through a lot in the last 40 years and plus in the industry. We're going to be talking to Danny Fingeroth in a few minutes. But as you always know, I have a few things to plug in. I just want to let everyone know that this week is our Wrestlemania weekend, right? So this weekend we have WrestleMania, so we have a lot of things planned up. We have a preview show. We're going to have post show, all that fun stuff. I have some guests that are going to be coming in. We're going to be talking a little bit about the show. Also, for next week, we got two legendary anchors that are going to be part of the show. On Monday, I'm going to have Scott Hanna. We're going to be talking about Spider-Man, which is going to relaunch with a new book with John Romita Jr. And Scott Hanna will be providing the inks for the book. So I'm really looking forward to that one because I love John Romita's work last time with Scott Hanna. So that's going to be great. Also, we're also going to have next week Keith Williams, someone else that I have the privilege to meet plenty of times in different shows, and we're going to talk about his ink work as well. So next week's Inkers that week, and that just happened by happenstance. Right. Oh, another thing I want to talk a little bit about is Free Comic Book Day. I have a lot of plans that I'm going to share with you guys in the near future on what we're going to do for Free Comic Book Day. Right now, I have some good things happening, but I'm not revealing them just yet until we have confirmation of it. Once I have confirmation, then I will share with you what we're doing for Free Comic Book Day. And lastly, which I wanted to leave this one for last, so have the Mocha Fest that's coming up this weekend. So not only do we have WrestleMania at night, but during the day we have Mocha Fest. And I will be there for the first day of Mocha Fest on Saturday. I will not be there for Sunday, but it is a 2-day event. And I'm looking forward to Mocha Fest. I've been there a few times. I've been there as a exhibitor as well. And it's always been a great experience. So I am looking forward to Mocha Fest this week. And all right. With that being said, the person I'm about to introduce with you, he is someone that I had the privilege to talk to a few minutes ago, and I am so looking forward to talking to Danny Fingeroth. He's a writer and editor. He did work at Marvel. He's done some work in DC. He's best known for being the editor of Spider-Man during many different runs that happened throughout the 80s and so forth. He also had a run on Darkhawk, the series, as well as the Deadly Foes of Spider-Man limited series and other comic books, which include Fantastic Four and Iron Man. He's taught writing and has taught comic writing and appreciation at New York University, the New School, and at the Mini Master Institute in Milan, Italy. And he is the senior VP of education at New York's MoCA, right, Museum of Comics and Cartoon Arts, and has spoken at comments at venues, including the Smithsonian Institution and the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Met. Right. Danny is an author of Superman on the Couch, What Superheroes Really Tell Us About Ourselves and Our Societies, which I'm looking forward to talk a little bit about that book. Disguised as Clark Kent, Jews, Comments, and Creations of Superhero, and The Rough Guide of Graphic Novels, which he co-authored with Mike Manley, of How to Create Comics from Script to Print. Lastly, we're going to talk about his book that he's currently promoting now, and it's The Amazing Life Story of Stan Lee, the Marvelous Stan Lee. And we'll talk a little bit about that. With that said, let me introduce to you Danny Fingeroth. So, Danny, how are you doing,
okay,
sir?
Izzy, how are you? Wait, I'm blocking my book. There you go.
Oh, there it is. It's just hiding in the background.
It was interesting hearing that the combination of fact and fiction and past, present, and future of my background. That's I can try to straighten some of it out, but you got most of it right. I'm not sure.
Yeah. I took most of that information from your biography. So
From my biography on my website.
yes, on your website. That's where I got that information from.
Okay.
So it's all there. So I'm doing my best to. I was trying to read it. I was like, okay, I'm trying to read this quickly.
Yeah, I need to update the website. The website has cobwebs on it, but so I'm nobody to blame but myself. But Yeah, I said most of it is true. The MoCA, the Museum of Comic and Cartoon Art, was absorbed by Society of Illustrators, but they still hold the MoCA Fest every year.
Hmm.
So I was very involved with MoCA when it was
Was
a independent entity, I'm actually doing a Spider-Man anniversary panel for them in June. Um, for the society, um, and
oh, okay.
yeah, I mean it was pretty close, But the Stanley book, I did the audio book as well, as you know, because you've been listening to it.
Hmm.
And I'm in the middle right now of doing audio. I've totally arranged it so I'm blocking. There we go. There you go. The book. Um, and but I've been doing the audiobooks for Superman on the Couch in Disguise as Clark Kent, which may seem odd. Those books came out a while ago, but there's a big market for audiobooks now. So for a company called Blackstone Publishers, I'm in the middle of recording Superman on the Couch in Disguise as Clark Kent. So yeah, but I really do need to update um, my website biography. So
And that's fine. I think for what it's worth, all the accomplishments you had, because I look at them as accomplishments. The fact that you've been through it all, you've seen it all from the beginning to the end, and was
not
able
that old.
to, well, at least in my generation, I'll say. And so there we go. There's our book.
There we go. Okay.
Yes, that's oh yeah, definitely. Um, but when I started reading comics, you were definitely part of that. I started reading comics back in '87. That's when I could truly say I started reading comics. That's where I
Okay.
got my first
All
comic
right.
book that I still own today. And I know that it was Spider-Man was the guy for me. Spider-Man was the guy. I love Spider-Man. He was my favorite character growing up. And yes, I loved the song. I loved the music. I loved everything about it. I was a diehard Spider-Man fan. Growing up as a kid, I would wake up every morning to watch the cartoons. And we're talking about the '60s cartoons, which at
Right.
that time was at syndication, and then the NBC series, the Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, which
Right.
I always had fun watching those. Um, but then when I actually got into comics in '87, at that time I was 11, and that's when I was really starting to read books, because as I told you earlier, when
Right.
we were sitting there talking, I just don't have the capacity in my brain to sit and read a novel. I could look at my wife and she reads this big fat book. i
Right.
i look at that and I say, oh no, not for me. My
But
books are picture books.
but not but you can listen to longer books as audiobooks. You were saying is that
Yeah, I could listen.
it's just
It works really well for me to listen to the audiobook, because especially when the narrator has a good voice, right? Obviously, if the narrator's voice is very monotone and makes you fall asleep, then you got to fall asleep and you're not going to pay attention to it.
yeah.
And things. But with your book, and what I was hearing, I was like, oh wow, this sounds really nice, and I'm picturing it because, as I mentioned to you before as well, I listened to the other audiobook of Stanley's memoirs,
Yeah.
and a lot of what you were saying was repeated from his book as well, from that other book. So I was like, okay, I know that story. I've heard that story. I heard that story. So I'm still in the early stages of the book, so I just started listening to it. In fact, I
Okay.
started
Well,
listening to it at
I,
four
I, I,
o'clock.
I must rush in here to say that there is uh, an awful lot of stuff in my book that's not in Stan's memoir, either in the graphic novel or the print version, or else why would I bother to write a book? So, I mean, it's the same person's life, but I think the perspective in my biography, A Marvelous Life, The Amazing Story of Stan Lee, um, is by definition more objective, gives a bigger picture of the
Mhm.
comics industry and Marvel and the overall culture that he came out of. So
Yeah,
yeah,
the one thing that was not mentioned in the memoirs was, his relationship with his brother, especially with the families, with Larry in particular, and how he was being, the perception that was going on between the families. And so that was something when I was hearing it, I was like, oh, okay, that's pretty interesting to hear. And of course, you were when I was listening to book, being a guy from Bronx, and you were name dropping places. I was like, I know that plot, I know that spot, I know that spot. Uh, it was like, okay, now you're checking me down my memory lane. You know what I mean?
It's a real.
Like throwing in University Avenue, Clinton
Uh-oh, you froze up.
stuff
You
was
froze up. Whatever.
yeah. So I was
This,
saying it's like throwing names like Clinton
right.
High School, Bronx High School of Sciences. That's just a whole. That's my memoirs if I ever decide to do that one day. Because I got stories, I can tell you that much.
I bet. I bet.
Yeah, I definitely do. So before we start even going further with the book, I want to talk a little bit about the comics, if you don't
Okay.
mind,
Sure.
because you were instrumental in one particular character, and that is many's favorites, and that is Spider-Man.
Right.
Right. So during your run as an editor, you were part of the team that included the black costume, right?
Right.
Am I right? The black costume, the symbiote.
Right.
Um, you were gone during Venom, but you also came back during it. But were you involved in the process of creating Venom? Not so much the costume. We know about the costume, but the
Yeah.
actual invention of Venom.
No, I had gone off staff. I was freelance editing and writing for several years, and so I was the editor when the black costume, that whole Secret Wars one period when the black costume first was introduced, and that first arc of stories with it, where it was trying to take Peter over. And then I was very involved with the beginning of the character Carnage and the whole
Yes.
Maximum Carnage storyline. But the actual, the only thing I'd say, we always knew that the costume would somehow. I wrote that cover copy that the
Mhm.
rumors are true, introducing the new Spider-Man. Um, of course, a great cover by Ron Frenz and Klaus Janson. Um, Not sure if Klaus or George Russo's colored it, because Klaus did like to color a lot of his own stuff, and it looks
Mhm.
a little more like it might be Klaus himself. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So I would say, as far as what became Venom, we knew that the alien costume was very popular, and we knew that in some way, shape, or form, it would come back regularly.
Mhm.
But as far as the specifics of it being Eddie Brock and his whole agenda, um, I was not involved with that, except to the extent that I wrote what a lot of people remember as the what if. What if Spider-Man had been
Yes.
replaced by his alien costume?
Mhm.
But no, Jim Salicrup was editing it then, when Brock was introduced.
So with the black costume in particular, I know when it first came, so at that particular time, I knew about the costume when I saw it in the comic books, but growing up as a kid, it was about the red and black, the red and blue, the Webbing one, the classic, Steve Ditko classic, then also Remedia, um, Senior. But then in the comic books, I would see the black costume, and I always thought it was a great looking costume.
Uh huh.
I was too young to be part of the backlash group that's first said we don't want this costume until the costume came up, and everybody, from what I heard, everyone said we love this costume.
Yeah.
When it came to the costume in particular and the overall designing of the costume, because it in reality it's a very simplistic costume. It's
Uh-huh.
not a complex look. It's really just a white spider,
Right.
some little white boxes in the on the arms, and then the eyes, which signifies what Spider-Man's supposed to look like in the dark. So very simple, two colors, right?
Hmm.
Black and white. You throw in blue to for lighting effects. What was it like being a part of the creation of that costume when it was being formed and so forth? When you first saw it, what was the overall thoughts about it,
Well,
especially with the backlash?
the backstory on that, which some of your viewers may know, is that a fan um, had submitted an idea for a graphic novel that involved Spider-Man in a black, I think it was called a ninja costume. And he submitted it to Jim Shooter, who was editor in chief at the time. And I think Jim didn't think that the story was what he wanted, anything he wanted to publish, or the art in particular. But he liked the idea of Spider-Man in a quote unquote ninja outfit. So he paid that guy for that idea, and then it eventually was going to be part of Secret Wars. It was the basis for the second Spider Woman costume, the Julia Carpenter Spider Woman,
Mm-hmm.
and then it would also be the design basis for Spider Man. Um, I do not remember particularly being involved, except seeing Mike Zeck's designs, because Mike was the artist on Secret Wars. So Mike designed that. I think who was editing that? Oh, Tom DeFalco was editing it. So and Tom was also had been the Spider-Man editor before me, and he was writing Amazing Spider-Man. So I'm sure I saw it somewhere in there, but and I guess if I had hated it, I would have had maybe some kind of veto power. But
Mm-hmm.
basically, I thought it was cool, and I said that I said, well, that'll be fun for a few issues, and then we'll go back, and that's what everybody thought. It'll be fun for a few issues, and then we'll go back to the regular costume, and it was modified to a certain degree by Rick Leonardi. Um, I think Rick. It was first, just because these things didn't come out in order. You saw it in Secret Wars first. You saw it in Amazing Spider-Man first. So really, the first person to have that costume drawn in print was Ron Frenz. And then the idea would be, wow, that's a cool costume. Now I have to buy every issue of Secret Wars to see how he got the costume. He wasn't getting it till issue 8, I think. So, around there was, comic fans, and I include in that subset a lot of comic professionals, including maybe even myself. Our first response to anything is panic. It's just like something different. Ah! Something different. The people behind it must have evil in mind. They must somehow be supervillains. It must somehow be a plot by Doctor Doom to ruin my life personally.
It's almost as if they were living the comic book.
Yeah, but it turns out it's just as Robert Crumb once said, it's just lines on paper, folks. So it turned out, so we were all kind of, I think, look, I'm being facetious, but I mean, anytime you mess with something like that, right? Part of the thing about a character like Spider-Man is he's always recognizable. So I think in some circles there was this fear that, oh my God, if we have a character on the cover that doesn't look that if an 8-year-old can't look at that cover and recognize Spider-Man, he's not going to buy it, or some whatever superstitious thinking we were ruled by at that point, and some kind of panic grew up, and and then I'm sure that there was some vituperative editorial in some fanzine somewhere. How dare they? Blah 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 blah. So, and then of course it turned out it sold like crazy. That people couldn't get enough of it. So rather then and then the marketing department, it's selling like crazy. Keep it going. But then they're the traditionalists like, no, it's not really the Spider-Man that I grew up loving. You, how dare? Anyway, it was that back and forth. And so suddenly the sales figures come in and they're through the roof. And then the mandate is, so we got rid of the costume. We kept him in the costume until the Secret Wars issue came out, and then got rid of it. But then all the letters came in, and the sales figures took a lot longer back in the day before the internet and email and the spreadsheets, the digital spreadsheets. So then it was like, get him back in the costume as soon as possible. So it, same thing happened with the Clonesaga years later. Oh no, it's terrible, it's terrible. Oh wait, we're selling a ton of comics, do it more. Oh no, you're betraying the character. Oh no, but oh yes, you're selling more comics than anybody else.
Yeah, I lived through the Clone Roads, the Clone Saga. I remember the Clone Saga.
Me too. I bought an apartment with the clone money. So,
I
um,
will say for the Clone Saga. I think for me, reading through the Clone Saga, it became for me it became bigger than it was, and it kind of snowballed into a point like, is this ever for me? Like, is this ever going to end? That's how I
well,
felt.
well,
I think that was part of it.
I left Marvel in the middle of that because of some corporate nonsense that was going on. But and I had a nice job offer from a guy named Byron Price to pioneer in the digital comic space. Yeah, but it was the same kind of thing. Oh no, the clone! Oh no! Oh no, the sky is falling! Oh no, it's the end of the world! Oh look, it's selling like crazy! More clone! More clone! More clone! Yeah,
And when there's only one book in particular I could say, one story in particular I was never a fan of, and to this day I'm still not a fan of. That will have to be the One More Day storyline.
I had
Um,
nothing to do with that. I
I
was
know you had nothing to do with
brought
that
up
one.
with it.
I know you had nothing to do with that, but for me, that was the one. I won't lie. Talking about being a fanboy, it was the one time I felt like ripping a book, and I never did. And it's because it felt like it was just an insult to all my years of following this story, to be told the story never happened, kind of thing. And I know they went back to kind of fix that. And there was always plans, just like Doctor Doom being spectacular, the superior Spider-Man. It's funny because when people say this is going to be the status quo, they know deep down inside this is not going to be the status quo. This is going to be the status quo for the next few months, maybe a year or two, and then we'll bring back the guy eventually.
And don't forget that as a really, really top selling comic book sells what these days? Maybe 150, 200,000, maybe.
Hmm.
How many people see the movies? I mean,
Yeah.
we're talking about something that's unknown to the general public that loves Spider-Man. They know it's on the Saturday morning and other cartoons. They know it's in the movie theaters. Literally right now. Excuse me, right now. I mean, it's so that while I always loved being part of the comics, I certainly, especially once these movies started coming out, it became quite clear that that the public perception versus of the characters versus the relatively small audience for the comics are two different things. Look, the job of people who make comics, and this is true of the people who make movies too. It's our job, and this is the hardest part, is to provide something that's familiar enough that the readers are comfortable with it, but that's different enough that they feel that they can't miss an issue.
Hmm.
Right? I mean, there's a lot
Yeah.
of that's if and so in a way that means our job is to piss people off just enough so that they got to come back every month to see just how we're screwing up. I can't believe they're doing this. Here's my $2. I mean, it's like they
$2. I wish.
go back. Here's my $5. What is
$5.
it?
Well, I think the average book
But I'm
now is
still
like
gonna
three
say
ninety nine or something like that.
we have to keep people literally and figuratively on the edge of their seats, because if it's just like, if it's, there's something cool going on in the Superman books that I can't miss, but it's just another issue of Spider-Man where Aunt May gets sick and Peter has to save her. I'll skip the Spider-Man and buy the Superman, or whatever. I mean, if once that happens, then people
Mhm.
then people may have a fondness for the character, but if they're not buying the comics every month, then that doesn't do you any good as a company.
Speaking of Aunt May, and you mentioned Aunt May, and you mentioned the movie. Um, Slight spoiler alert for those of you who haven't seen the movie. Hope I think most people have by this point. This book, in particular, is a book that I saw and I said, you know what, I would like to talk a little bit about this one. Spider-Man 400, A Death in the Family. That title seems to be borrowed from another popular comic book series from a different company, but we'll
I
talk
think,
about
I,
that.
I think it was borrowed from some actual work of literature from like 100 years ago too.
Really? So this is the comic book where we see the death of Aunt May, at least temporary death of Aunt May,
Right, cheap.
right? Because no one stays dead forever, including Aunt May, who should have been dead long time ago. No pun intended about it. But this one here, which I remember, I still own this copy too. I own this copy of this book.
You
Um,
own the one. This is the plain vanilla one. You own this one, or you own the
I
one with?
own I own the gray cutout one.
Uh
That
huh.
is so not the paper, not the one that's the standard style. It's the one that has like the gray cutout.
Uh huh.
That it's kind of lifted up a little bit. That it's
Right.
that
It's
that's
impossible to read. It's possible to read.
yeah. That it you when you take a picture of it, it's like impossible. But this is kind of like the
Yeah.
best way of doing it. So this is
Yeah.
the one I have. Um, Going back to that book, that was the death of Aunt May. She died in this book. And obviously you guys made the decision to do it. But in this particular instance, there was no intention of bringing her back, was there? Because she did eventually come back, but
You know, we have learned in comics over the years to never say never. I mean, was it our intention to never bring her back? Yeah. But we with that whole storyline, which involved Peter thinking he was the clone and the clone thinking he was Peter,
Mhm.
and then switching, and then it went back and forth. Uh, Tom DeFalco was my boss and is my friend and a very smart guy. Um, and when we were in the middle of making all these decisions about the course of the character's life and adventures, Tom said to me, "I won't try to do a Tom DeFalco imitation because that usually ends up becoming Yogi Bear." But he said to me, "Yeah, the guys after us are going to change it back anyway," and he was right. So I think as certainly as editors, but also I honestly can't tell you whether the writers had a backdoor or a alternative way to dig themselves out of that plot situation. But as editors, it was our job to have alternatives and ways to get out of different
Mhm,
corners we may have painted ourselves into. And so I'd say, did we intend it to be forever?
mhm.
Yeah, but we also knew, I mean, even then, Spider-Man had been around for 30 years, and Marvel had been, publishing, sort of a continuous storyline since Fantastic Four #1 in 1961. So I think we knew that things could be done and undone and redone and tweaked, and so that's the best answer I can give you to that. We acted as if it was forever, but we kind of knew that depending on fan reaction and if there was going to be a movie or something that came out where Aunt May was important and it needed to match up in the comic, there's a lot of different factors. I
Yeah,
will
that's
I
what.
will say I will say that I did make the call to Stan to tell him that we were planning to kill her,
Mhm.
and I don't know if he loved the idea, but he said he was okay with it.
Yeah, every time I got a chance to listen to Stan when he would talk about certain things, he always was on the fence of they do what they need to do, and he will always defend it from my perspective, a decision that was being made. Not to say that he liked the decision, but he defended the decision as if this is the choice they made, this is what they went through. He may say something I probably would have done it a different way, but for
Right,
the most part, he was always on the fence of that's what storytelling's about. It's
right,
about allowing the writers and the artists make the decision, the creators make the decision. um
right. I think he realized very soon after he stopped working on the monthly comics as a writer and as an editor that yeah that he not only couldn't control. He certainly didn't want to control it. His attention was elsewhere. He was looking in general at the bigger picture. Although he'd come back and write comics occasionally, and yeah, I think he'd sort of been there and done that. He'd been writing and editing comic books since he was 18 years old. So I think at a certain point, he just realized that he needed to let other people handle the day to day.
Great. So let's go. I really want to get to talk a little bit more about Stan, but I want to go through some books that I was told you were credited for in some way or fashion. So
Okay.
I just got to make sure of this because, again, when you do research, it says, okay, he wrote this or he edited this, and it's like, I just wrote a snippet. That does happen from time to time again. I do have some books that we'll go over. I know some that you're definitely part of, but there was some that stood out, and I decided to grab one or two that stood out. So what we'll do is do it really quickly. That way we can get to the real heart of what we want to talk about. So the first book I'm going to go through, which I definitely know you had a hand in, was The Deadly Foes of Spider-Man.
Yep.
Right. So quickly, what was this all about? Obviously, being that it was a Spider-Man book outside of Spider-Man, was it meant to be in continuum? Was it meant to be more about a villains gallery storyline or anything like that?
Well, it wasn't a villains gallery. It was meant to be almost later on with that series years later, Runaways. The idea was that Spider-Man was in it because obviously he would sell books, but the story Spider-Man was almost a guest star in it. So in this Deadly Foes of Spider-Man and its follow-up Lethal Foes of Spider-Man, Spider-Man would and maybe even Peter Parker would show up, but they'd be almost guest stars, and the book was really about the relationship between the villains and sort of trying to get inside their heads and humanize them and sort of show how they were the heroes in their own minds and in their own point of view. Villains don't think of themselves as villains. Villains see themselves as the hero of the story. So it was more about kind of the internecine rivalries and squabbles and battles between them, and there would be action with Spider-Man, but it definitely was intended and it was from the point of view of the villains.
Cool. Let's go to our next book that I found, Dazzler. Okay, tell me a little bit about the Disco Queen. I always loved Dazzler, and I think this costume was so much better than the other one that followed. But the other one was still cool. But this one was like Disco Queen at its finest. And this one, in this particular image, she doesn't have her roller skates. But
she does not. But it's a great image. It's by John Romita Jr. And is there an inking credit on it?
I'm not sure. I could always find out, but I think that'll take up time.
Yeah. It was the first series I wrote. I'd been editing it. And then, look, she was supposed to be part of a movie deal with Casablanca Records, who was one of the major disco record labels. And Bo Derek was supposed to star as the Dazzler, and a couple of other. There was one of the disco divas of the era, and none of those deals came through. But Marvel had done all this development work on the character, and so they decided to put a series out. But yeah, by the time it came out, I think maybe in 1980, disco had pretty much died. But I'm not even sure. It goes back so long. I'm not even sure why we didn't take her and put her in a different costume. Well, very very often she'd battle in civilian clothes. Her thing. There are actually 2 Masterworks volumes that I've written introductions to of the first 20-something issues of Dazzler. She had a lot of similarities to Spider-Man, except that it took her a long time to make a commitment to being a superhero. She was like, I'm a singer, I'm a entertainer, I'm a this, I'm a that, I'm not a superhero. She was in many ways a classic Marvel character. Probably we should have gotten her into a different outfit earlier. But one thing to remember is that comic book creators may be a lot of things, including creative and intelligent and funny and inventive. One thing we're not is really, maybe it's changed now, is we're not really up on current music so much. So
We're too busy
so
drawing.
uh, right. You know, um, so I would say maybe that's why she ended up, in the disco. But it was fun to do. There were some challenges involved with the character. But it was a fun. It was a young person exploring their identity in that Spider-Man
Mhm.
way. So
Yeah, and there's still a lot of love for Dazzler even to this
yeah,
day. She obviously she always makes a comeback every so often. So we'll always see her in some format or another.
I mean,
Um,
it's funny. There was I worked as an assistant editor, and then I also wrote a bunch of articles for the comic adaptation of the movie Xanadu, which was a musical.
yes, I know about Xanadu. Never
Yeah,
watched it, but I know what you're talking about.
and I mean, it's sort of funny. This is in the same ballpark. It's like, that was literally a movie musical, and and yet we insisted on making a comic book out of it. This is a similar thing. It's like character is so much about music and sound, and yet and yet she's had a long life as a character in a silent medium.
Yeah, I know, but I would love to see Taylor Swift do this. I don't know why. That's who I think of
That would be
immediately.
a great idea. I wonder if anybody's approached her about it.
It's
She couldn't
quite
take,
possible.
she
She
couldn't
would,
take the pay cut.
yeah. Darkhawk, which is another one that was was something when I saw it. It was just a cool looking character. For me, it felt like because of the claws that's coming out of his hand, it was almost like Iron Man meets Wolverine in a way.
Well, that was
Um,
part of the idea. Yeah,
yeah.
I wrote every issue of that series when it first came out. I wrote all 50 issues, 3 annuals, and then this came out last year. This was a
Mhm.
30th, and like it says, celebrating 30 years with
Great.
creators of the
Love
past.
it.
So Mike Manley,
Mike Manley, yes.
the character was created by Tom DeFalco and Mike Manley, but I wrote it from issue one, and so this is Mike and I. Not this cover. I can't make out the
Yeah, this is a different artist,
right,
obviously doing
but
the painted style.
but the lead story was an 18-page, um, the Darkhawk story, sort of set without naming a year. We pretty much set it in the early days of his career. It's a lot of fun to work on.
All right, let's go to another. So slightly little different here because I definitely saw that you have writing credits for the handbook. The handbook was for me and many people, many artists. I was speaking to someone not that long ago about the handbook and how much we love the handbook because it got us to understand characters without having you know to go into the comics. I know I've must have drawn thousands of characters
Right.
because of the handbook. Like, oh, this guy, I've never seen this guy before. I want to draw him. How was that project in general? In just
Well,
being part of a project like that?
I will say that altogether I wrote, I want to say maybe five, maybe three entries. So I was not I was not heavily involved. I wrote the entries for characters that I was either writing or editing
Mhm.
that that I seemed to be the appropriate person, or nobody else wanted to. I mean, so I think I wrote the Kazar entry because I was editing Kazar, and you took all the information you could. You read as many stories as you could, and read up on them. But then there were certain things like um, Kazar's parents' names had never been established, so I just gave them the names of my parents. That
That's a good way of doing it.
so it was a combination of that kind of thing, especially when it came to little details that were not essential to the essence of the character. But I was more involved with something called the Marvel Saga, the official history of the Marvel Universe.
Mhm,
I edited that, and
mhm.
and was much more involved with how that was structured. But I certainly don't think I did any more than half a dozen entries for the Marvel Universe.
All right. One book that I'm pretty sure you had a hand with was the new universe, Cyforce.
Yeah, I wrote probably wrote about a dozen issues of Cyforce and an annual.
Mhm. As I read, they were meant to be the X-Men of that universe.
They were meant to be the X-Men of that.
That's what I read.
Where
So,
where did you read that? Where did you?
um, I read that from a comic. They're a comic book group that they they grab the collections and they get all as much information as they possibly can. I'm pretty sure not all of it is fully accurate, but it's called League of Champions. It's where I get my information on pull lists books, like the books that are coming out during the week, especially when I need to get the indie books. That's which is a little harder to come across than your typical Marvel and DC books, and even Image for that matter.
What's the
But they
website?
also it's called League of I'll tell you right, League of comicgeeks.com. That's the name of the place. League of
I mean, look,
comicgeeks.com.
I can't say that nobody ever did say they're the X-Men of the new universe, but there were several teams.
Mm-hmm.
There was Spitfire and the Troubleshooters. There was
Mm-hmm.
DP7. I mean, you could, I guess, in the sense that the X-Men was so popular in the mid '80s, that I guess that would have been the model. I didn't make these characters up. I came in very early. I think this was my first issue. There had been another writer involved, although Mark Texera
Yeah, Mark Tex.
was the artist from the get go, and he was wonderful to work with. But
Mhm.
um, it was characters. It was a group of teenagers. Sort of if the X-Men is a group of Spider-Men, which it kind of is, it's a bunch of teenagers struggling with the balance between power and responsibility. Well, this was similar. I have a fondness for these characters. They were, um, the premise of the new universe was that it was a universe without magic, without it. It was as close as possible to the world outside your window. Except, of course, once you introduce these super characters into it sort of immediately becomes not the world outside your window. But 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 the idea was no magic, no alien planets,
Mhm.
except But those rules were always broken.
Yeah.
But that
Eh,
was at least the initial premise. Was
mhm.
it? The idea was, they started the new universe at the 25th anniversary of the creation of the Marvel universe at Fantastic Four #1. So I guess the concept was, if the Marvel universe was somewhat more realistic than superhero comics had been up to then the new universe would be even more realistic.
Mhm. Yeah. I'm shocked that it tried to do a few revivals here and there. I'm pretty sure they did try to bring it back at one time or another, but I haven't seen anything else past that. And there was one particular group. I'm trying to remember the name of one of that group that was almost the only comparison I could give them was somewhat of a Suicide Squad type group or something like that. But I can't remember their name for the life of me. The
in
name of that group
in the new universe.
in the new universe.
So
I
there
don't know
was
why
Suicide
there was
Squad.
that it wasn't like Suicide Squad in the sense that they were a Task Force X. It was more like these are characters that could die
Well, that was
in
something called Strike Force. There's something called Strike Force Moratorium.
Strike Force. Yes, that's the one.
Right, but
That's
that
the one I
that
was
was
thinking
not
about.
that was not connected to the new universe.
Oh no, I thought it was for some reason. I don't know why.
No, it came out around the same time.
That's probably what it was. All right, so we're gonna move away a little bit from the actual comic books, and we're gonna talk about some other material that you had a part in and you had a hand in, or
Okay.
co-author. One in particular, which is near and dear to me personally, which I'm about to share with you, is this one here: How to Create Comics from Script to Print. The reason why I'm saying near to dear to me because here's my copy, and this is I am one of the people that did buy this book and read through it.
Did you buy
Um,
the DVD as well?
no, I did not. I honestly, when I got it, I actually got this book because of Tomorrow Books. because I was a big fan of the sketch
Oh, the DVD.
magazines. And
Tomorrow's put out the DVD as well.
yeah, so I never got the DVDs for it, but I did go through this book many times. I was talking to Andy Smith last week, and we were talking a little bit about his book, and I also have happened to have his book. And it's, to be honest, it was completely coincidental that I have both books, yours and
Oh,
his, when it comes to how to draw books or how to create comics. But um, thinking about it as from a perspective of a writer and an editor, one of the things I've always remembered from any writer and editor is the importance of having that relationship with with the artist, and making sure you have that good relationship. It may not have to be the most super tight relationship,
mhm.
but at least you have to be on the same page in order to get a good page.
It's helpful.
um and things like that. So looking at this was really useful because normally when you get how-to books, they're usually about how to draw it this way or how to draw it that way, but it's not really about the relationship between the writer and the
Right.
script or anything like that. So when you guys started doing this, my understanding, they were part of excerpts, or was the intention to make this one full book?
The book started. Tomorrow's is a great publisher. They do the Jack Kirby Collector and Alter Ego and Back Issue and a lot of other very cool magazines and books and available digitally. So it's TWO Morrows. It's two people named Morrow who founded the company.
Clever.
So tomorrows.com. And they've been doing this for like 20 years. And Mike, so Mike Manley and I did the first 25 issues on the first Darkhawk annual, and we'd worked a lot on other projects as well, with me as his editor on Alpha Flight and a bunch of other stuff. And so he was putting out a magazine called Draw Magazine, which still comes out from Tomorrow's, and it's how-tos and interviews and instructions and articles about
Yeah.
how to draw for comics and animation. And I thought, gee, I wonder if Tomorrow's would be interested in a similar magazine about writing.
Mhm.
So I pitched it to John Morrow, the publisher, and he said, let's do it. So I was doing my magazine, Mike was doing his, and then we thought it might be kind of fun to do a crossover. I believe it might have been the first trade magazine crossover of all time of how to create comics it would start in. I forget if it started in Right Now, but it started in either. My magazine was called Right Now magazine,
Mhm.
and then it would conclude in the other, and we'd come up with a character, and so we did that, and then it was popular, and we decided to, and we did a DVD, which is the DVD is focused mainly on art. I give a little bit of a talk about writing, but it certainly is mostly about art. But we did this book that combined the material from the two magazines, but there's also I'd say about a third or more of the book is brand new material done just for the book,
Mm.
and so it. But you're right. A lot of it is, so we do give you the basics on writing and drawing and how to write a plot and how to write a script and the difference between different styles of scripting, the so-called Marvel method as opposed to the full script. Also, but a lot of it involves dialogue between me and Mike and sort of what that give
Mhm.
and take between a writer and artist is. Um, just sort of give you a sense of how those relationships work. So I'm very. It's nice to hear that came through in your reading of it.
Yeah, I was, like I said, I was a big fan of grabbing how-to books and things of that nature. But I was when there were certain books that I would see, and you would catch them in your local bookstore, and for me it was like, okay, this is for like a 5-year-old. So 5-year-old how-to books to me never really took my attention. It was the books that really focused on how the medium really works, as opposed to this is how you draw a cat, this is how you draw a dog, this
Right.
is how your superheroes should have their chest out or something like that. And I never did like that. Instead, I like grabbing books where it talks about the storytelling aspect. Because one thing I learned very early is that and you being an editor, I'm sure you've seen this hundreds, that maybe even thousands of times. When people come up with a portfolio and the portfolio is full of pinups,
Right.
it it's not what you need, because you have more people with pinups. You need someone that can tell a story. You need someone that could, hold a bottle, show that they're holding a bottle, or using characters with emotion and things like that. So that's what I was trying to do with my art in particular. And in reality, I ended up becoming more of a editor type artist,
Right.
where today people come up to me, and the first thing I always tell them is, okay, you want me do you want to hear what you want to hear, or do you want to hear the truth? And of course they're going to say, I want you to hear the truth. It's like, well, I'm going to be honest with you, and if you can handle it, then I'm good with it. But not to be, not to take their work and say this is garbage, but more on the lines of saying this is why this is not working, as opposed to and explain what you need to do to fix that. That's my approach to talking to people when I'm in a show and things like that. Because again, a lot of people just like to do their pinups, and I learned very early that the pinups are beautiful, but if you're going to do a pinup, you might as well become a cover artist. But they're not probably hiring cover artists, because right now there's plenty of cover artists out there. And
Well, the,
back in the day, it was more about the sequential work, because we needed people that could meet deadlines and do 22 pages within a
and,
month's time.
and tell a story in a clear, exciting manner, all that stuff. I mean, but that's the job. It's telling it's panel to panel storytelling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. All right, let's go with some books you've written. The first one, which we talked about earlier, which I saw, I do remember seeing this book,
Right.
and it's Superman on the Couch. All right, talk to me a little bit about Superman on the Couch.
Well, it's what superheroes really tell us about ourselves and our society. Great cover by Mark Bagley and
Yeah,
Scott.
I immediately noticed Mark Batley.
Right? And by the way, Scott Hanna and Keith Williams. They're going to be on the same show or two different
No,
shows?
they're gonna be on. It so happens that they're gonna be in two different shows, and I realized that they're both inkers.
Yeah. Well, look, that's going to be great. They're both really talented, really interesting, really smart guys. So those, I recommend people tune back in for those. This was a book. Um, it's a prose book, by the way. It has a comic book cover, but it's actually all prose. It was a book of. It was sort of going back to my English major roots in a way. I, I'd started out in college as an English major, then became a film major. But this was really, although it's called Superman on the Couch, and that's a popular format. If you go to the Amazon or to a bookstore, there's like every conceivable pop culture franchise, blah blah blah, on the couch. The Sopranos on the couch. The Honeymooners on the couch, whatever.
It's like Chicken Soup back in the day, Chicken Soup for the Soul
Yeah,
type books.
yes, but I mean, it's not. They're done by a variety of publishers and variety of authors, and so this was my one thing I'd noticed in as I'd gotten into writing about comics and doing panels and leading groups of people in discussions and teaching, is that since Frederick Wortham, who that's a whole other show, but since the 50s, when the psychiatrist Frederick Wortham wrote this book called Seduction of the Innocent, that kind of exploded the comic book industry, not in a good way.
Yeah.
Nobody had really written a psychological exploration of superheroes, which was really weird, because superheroes and pop culture become so popular. And so I was friendly with an editor at the publishing house at Continuum, and I pitched him this idea, and he liked it, and so it's more of a social. It's a combination of psychological, sociological look at what makes superheroes tick, why people love superheroes, what kind of person sort of the psychological profile might like one hero versus another. It's combined with sort of an insider's view of how superheroes are created and how stories are told. So there's an aspect of it that's also a how the sausage is made thing too. So it's it's for people who are curious about this superhero phenomenon. The book came out in 2004. It went through 4 or 5 printings. It was very popular, and to this day, anytime I go to a convention, at least 1 or 2 people will come up and tell me that they wrote like their master's or their doctoral thesis using this as a lot of the research. So that's kind of it's a book people seem to respond to.
Great. Yeah, and I'm looking forward. I'm looking forward to getting my opportunity to get my hands on it because I really do want to learn
Well,
a little bit more about it.
the rights have reverted back to me, and I'm looking for a publisher. So if anybody
Mhm,
is interested in publishing it,
mhm.
Danny at DannyFingeroth.com.
There we go. All right. All right. So now before we start talking about Stan the Man, I want to go over and talk a little bit about Mocha. Because first of all, Mocha's happening this weekend. Mocha Fest 2022 is happening this weekend. I'm definitely going. When I heard it was happening this week, I was like, man, out of all the weekends you picked, no one knew, of course, because it's going to be a very, very busy weekend for me.
Uh-huh.
If you heard from the plugs I was doing this earlier.
Oh no,
Um,
I didn't.
so so this weekend just happens to be the number one wrestling event of the year, which is WrestleMania,
Okay.
and I'm definitely covering WrestleMania in some capacity. So not only am I covering WrestleMania, I'm also going to cover Mocha Fest because I'm a comic book fan and I'm a wrestling fan, so I got to do both. And in Mocha in particular, one thing I've always loved about Mocha is the fact that it is the indies show. It's the show for the indies. It's the
Right.
show that focuses on the local artists, but not just the local artists, but the underground artists, the up and coming artists, the slightly different artists. You go to this fest and you get to really meet a lot of great people, with all different ideas, all different styles that you normally wouldn't have seen in a Spider-Man or a Batman or a Superman. Um, and you had a big hand in that. So thank you for that because I enjoyed it because I did attend Mocha years ago with my comic group when we first started Pronto. It was the first show we did. Pronto Comics. It was the
Well,
first show we did.
I should clarify a couple of things. So,
Mhm.
is there a question, or can I jump in here?
Yes, you could jump in here definitely.
All right. Mocha started out as a fundraising event for the Museum of Comic and Cartoon Art, which was in Lower Manhattan. It was started by a guy named Lawrence Klein.
By the Soho area, I remember going a few
Oh,
times.
area exactly. 10 years ago, for reasons largely, as it was very popular. They had incredible exhibitions. They had great. I was their educational director, but 10 years ago they merged with the Society of Illustrators, and so Society of Illustrators now is the home of what had been Mocha. They have a floor dedicated to it, and they still run the Mocha Arts Fest. So while I moderated many panels, I put together and moderated many panels, and I also had a table at Mocha Fest. I was certainly not the person who created or I was not involved in creating or initiating it. So I don't want to. There were people from Lawrence Klein, Ellen Abramowitz,
Mhm.
a lot of people whose names I'm forgetting, to the current people, including Anel Miller and the terrific crew at Society of Illustrators. Um, so, if you're comfortable going to public events, I highly recommend this event.
Mhm.
I'm ambivalent because I myself am not comfortable going to public events, so I'm not going to this because I feel like this COVID is going to still be around and bite us all on the ass, and we should
Whew.
be careful. Having said that, if you're not like me, then definitely go to the Mocha Fest.
That's a good way of putting it, because it is a great fest, and I'm with you on that.
It's the best, and I've heard some griping about that the ticket prices have gone up, and they have, but it literally is a fundraiser, and
And
It's,
they're affordable. It's.
yeah.
I'm going to tell you right now that it might be a little difficult for me to read it, but I'm pretty sure the viewers could see it. It's $18 for a single day. That's really
Or
not a lot.
$25 for both days, which
Yeah,
means
25 for the weekend.
obviously they're trying to encourage people to come for both days.
Hmm.
When you have that smaller price differential.
Yeah.
Um, I have not been to any conventions since the COVID. I'm planning tentatively to go to a couple. I'm supposed to be a special guest at San Diego, which I was supposed to be a special guest at San Diego in 2020 and 2021. And in theory, now this time for sure in 2022, I may be going to what's the one that Shelton Drum puts on, the Heroes Con. I may be going to
Mhm.
Heroes Con, but I'm just taking it day by day with this stuff. I'd love to go to, I've like everybody, my income is taking a hit by not doing
Mhm.
conventions, and just it's nice to see the fans and nice to see my friends and colleagues, but I'm just taking it day by day in our strange new world.
Yeah, I agree. We just did the Big Apple show this weekend, and I had a blast. It was a 1 day event.
Right.
You probably would not have felt comfortable, to be quite honest. But for what it's worth, it felt at that moment, it felt like things were getting better, and it felt more like a convention in the traditional sense. Um, from the days of I remember going to the Penn Plaza across the street from Madison Square Garden all the time.
Right. Well, I was a regular exhibitor at the
Yeah,
Fest. So usually Jim Salicrup and I would sit together, and
and he was there. He was actually there too. Jim was there.
everybody's got to have their own comfort level.
Yeah, he was actually in a really great spot, by the way.
Oh,
Um, so but but I do like conventions when they're about the comics.
right.
Um, and in this particular instance, these Mocha and Mocha Fest in general were about the comics, and that's what
Yeah.
I love. They
Oh,
may not be about your mainstream, but they're about comic books. And to be quite honest, many people have come from Mocha that are in mainstream.
oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So it's the indies, but what's great about the indies is that you're looking at the people that are going to be the names that people are going to talk about
And the
2 or 3 years later.
and the panels at Mocha Fest are always great.
Yes, they are. They really are. So
Interesting panels with.
can't wait to do it. To be
Yeah.
quite honest, I've been waiting to do a Mocha Fest for a while. I even convinced one of my coworkers about it, and she's like, "Oh, really?" It's like, "Yeah, you'll love it. It's definitely it's your ballpark." And because she's not much of a
Right.
superhero person, but she likes saga and books and those types of books. All right, let's talk about the main attraction. Really, Stan the Man. I managed to get a book signed by Stan at the first New York Comic Con. Um, and and now from this moment on, my kids call Stan Grandpa. They call him Grandpa
I
because
think
they
a
never.
lot of kids do.
Yeah, and you know what? When I got a chance to even talk to him even for a few minutes, he was everything I saw, yeah, and everything I wanted
Oh, that's
in
good.
someone. So, talk to me a little bit about your book, The Amazing Story of Stan Lee, and really anything you want to share about it in
It's called.
particular.
I mean, I guess you could, when you read the cover, it's sort of in the reverse order. It's called A Marvelous Life: The Amazing Story of Stan Lee. But I could see how from reading the title, reading the cover.
You're a
Uh,
comic book guy. You know about left to right.
no, I do. But
That's
no,
what this wasn't your call.
I was only the writer on this, not the.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. This wasn't your call.
Right. So, I'd started thinking about writing a book about Stan probably about 10 or more years ago. Um, and, so about 5 years ago, my agent negotiated a deal with St. Martin's Press, which is part of Macmillan. And so it's unauthorized, but Stan did do two lengthy interviews for the book. I think, I won't say they were the last ones because he lived about another year and a half, but I think there were some of the last lengthy, in depth interviews that he did. It's funny. There's another book that's come out since that's kind of a little more negative about Stan, and he was a controversial guy. He did stuff that people loved. He did stuff people hated. There was controversy about how he treated and worked with his collaborators, especially Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko.
Mhm.
So one thing I regret about the title is that it looks like it's sort of a feel good puff piece hagiography. But it's as far as I'm concerned, it's an in depth, reasonably objective book that is in places very tough on Stan. I chose not to have neon signs and organ music going.
Mhm.
I mean, I gave my readers credit enough to see to kind of read my accounts of what's going on and judge for themselves whether Stan behaved nobly or ignobly or just in a human way. But I, so I, because I've sometimes, especially when people who haven't read the book, they go, "Oh, it's just a feel good puff piece about Stan," and again, your mileage may differ, but what I did bring to it that I again don't think anybody else brings is having worked in the comic business as a writer and an editor. So I would say not. Obviously, there's nobody who has a career exactly like Stan, but I performed a lot of the functions and played a lot of the roles he did. So I think I bring an understanding to it, both in writing the book and in the many people I interviewed, starting with his brother Larry and Neil Adams um, and John Romita I had earlier interviews with and other
Mhm.
people, but Roy Thomas and just on and on and just points of view from a lot of people who knew him and worked with him, loved him, weren't so fond of him, uh, saw his flaws, saw his strong points. So I think I put together, I think overall, while it's clear that I admired him, um, I think it's also clear that he had a lot of blind spots and but a very interesting life. And because he came into comics working for his cousin Martin Goodman, who was the publisher
Mhm.
of Timely and Marvel, that's a very complicated relationship, and I get into that. But because he came into the business in 1940, so literally 2 years after Action Comics #1, where Superman debuted, and was in and around the comics business for the next 75 years, it's in a way as much a history of the comics business and of Marvel as it is of Stan, because he was so key to so much of that for so long. It's a unique,
Mhm.
it's a unique career and very challenging to write about. And I hope I came close to giving an accurate and interesting representation. And I also did the audio book. So
Mhm.
if you've been enjoying listening to this, well, just imagine 14 hours of that in your ear. But you
Yeah, I did see that at 14 hours. I was like, "Oh, okay, this is a long one." Um, but
also,
one
I have a lot of photos that nobody else has.
but
In
but
also,
it, what one of the things that when I was first listening to it that you said was the fact that very clearly put is like name me your favorite comic book creators or artists or things like that, and most people will say Stan Lee, not knowing that he was never really truly an artist in that sense. He wasn't your traditional comic book artist. Just like your book said, he was a doodler, and he had his share of art here and there, but of course the artists were Jack Kirby, was Ditko, and so forth.
well,
um
my point with that really was not so much whether he was an artist or not, because I think my point there. I mean, I know my point was that he's the only one. He's the only comic book creator that most people have heard of. Period.
True. And
Artist,
I was just gonna go there,
yeah,
and say that it's like when you think of comic books, if you're not in the industry, the person you think of is Stan Lee.
yeah,
So everyone he transcended comic books as far as
right,
who he is because of, you know, first of all, he represented comic books, when you think about comics, you think of Stan Lee for the most part, especially for years and years to this day. One of the reasons why you see, Stan Lee presents and things like that, and why people are so, enamored by it. But he was a showman. He was very charismatic. Um, in a world that's, to be quite honest, and I know this being an artist working with fellow artists myself, I'm not I'm not the type of person that's very, to themselves. I'm
Right.
very, open. But a lot of artists are, they're tied away in a corner somewhere.
They're
Um,
introverts. Yeah.
they're very, yeah, very, and that's why they're really good artists, because this is where they are able to express themselves in ways that they couldn't do in the public. And he, on the other hand, was really the exact opposite of that. Where he would go out, he would talk, he would represent the business, and in some cases he wouldn't want to represent the business because of, the fact that at that particular time it was considered like, what, you're a comic book artist, we don't want to talk to you. But today it's completely the other way around, where now that's you're like the number one person in the room. So he would be it, if I use wrestling as a terminology, he was the Hulk Hogan, he was the Stone Cold Steve Austin
Right.
of his era. That's who, when you thought of comic books, you thought of Stan Lee. And dare I say it, many people thought he created other people that he never even touched, like Batman, like Superman. There,
Right.
he's like, oh yeah, he's the guy who made Batman. It's like, oh, well, Bob Kane and some other guy that people don't know about called Bill Finger made Batman.
Well,
And
a lot of people don't know the difference between Marvel and DC movies. I mean, they just know it's a superhero movie. Somebody in a spandex costume and a cape,
Mhm.
beating up bad guys, or driving around in a super duper kind of car. So it's,
Yeah.
we live this stuff so much that we forget that to most people it sort of just falls into this giant giant mass of entertainment.
Yeah, especially now, it's like you go see a movie. Obviously, now that he's passed away, you don't get that, but you get the nice little Easter eggs here and there.
Right.
He was in all the cameos for all the Marvel movies, and you go to a DC movie, and someone said, "What? Where was Stan Lee?" I was like, "It's not his company, unless you watch Teen Titans, the
Right.
cartoon
That's the only
movie," which I thought was fantastic when they did it. I thought that was the best thing ever. So yeah, I'm looking forward to continuing to listen to the audiobook. I will be listening to it for at least 13 hours. I think I got 2 hours in already. So and I'll listen to it again. I'm about
one.
to go back to the office next week, so I got something to listen to when I go to the office.
Okay, good.
So,
But
but I'm
it's in
looking forward to.
it's in paperback and hardcover paperback audiobook. About at least half a dozen foreign editions. I forget exactly which, but
And I like the cover. I personally like the cover. I think it's a great
oh,
cover.
I like the cover too. Just but it is the reading order.
Mhm.
You know, kind of. You a lot of people do think it's called The Amazing Story of Stan Lee, and the subtitle is A Marvelous Life.
Mhm.
Yeah. No, I have to say when it when I first saw the cover, my publisher showed it to me. I said, "Isn't it a little garish?" Because it's red and blue, it's Spider-Man colors, and I pointed out some other book that I thought was classier and kind of more subtly designed, and they said, "Yeah, but that book sold 3,000 copies." And I said, let's go with the garish cover with
Well,
the
that's what the other books look like too. The other one is like, it's just him like, here I
well, yeah,
am with all my glory.
it makes perfect sense, and it does its job as a cover, and so I got no complaints.
Yeah.
I mean, in a way, it was sort of rule lesson number one of the comic book business, being applied to prose publishing.
Mhm. Awesome. All right. So with that said, Danny, it's been great having you on my show.
Thank
Before,
you.
what was
Thank you
that?
for having me.
I can hear you. I can hear you. It's great having you in the show. I just want, before we end the broadcast, where can everyone find you?
I'm on Facebook and Twitter are probably the best bet. I have a website, which is very out of date, and I need to to update it. But yeah, Facebook, Twitter, or Danny at DannyFingeroth.com is my email. So I'm findable if anybody's looking for me, and
We
you
put
know, I have
we
some.
put your information in the description, so all that's there. Obviously, it's rolling now,
Oh, good.
right now, on Facebook and you're in Instagram as well.
And
I
I'm
saw you're in Instagram.
on Instagram, Twitter, yeah, all the hip and happening.
We're gonna get you to do TikToks pretty soon. Do little dance numbers.
I haven't quite gotten there yet, but
I don't think you need to worry about that one.
maybe sometime this year. And I've got a bunch of projects in the works that, as they say, are top secret. I can't really talk about them. Although in June, I think June 7th. Let me see, June. Yeah, June 7th at 7 p.m. Eastern time. I will have an all-star panel of creators um, celebrating Spider-Man's 60th anniversary. Not connected with Marvel, but Tom
Yeah,
DeFalco there.
they did one recently, not that long ago, like about a week ago. Marvel did one.
Yeah, I think so. I haven't seen
Mhm.
that yet, but this will be something similar, different. Although it'll be different, but I guess we'll talk about some similar things and a bunch of different book projects and so on that I'll be having announcements about soon. So and maybe some conventions. Who knows?
Yeah, and I would love to see you in one of those conventions once you come. I think a comic just walked in. Oh, that is a family member just saying hello.
Okay. All
All
right.
right, that's one of my family members. I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Well,
Um,
how are your
so
family?
yes, so Danny, I'm gonna put you in the lobby again, and we could talk while I end the broadcast. Okay?
Sounds good. Thanks a lot,
Thank you.
everybody.
Okay, guys, that was Danny Fingeroth. It was great talking to him, learning a lot about just in general about the history of comics and Stan Lee and all the work he's done. Before I let you go, one of the things I want to make sure you all remember is that I will be in Mocha Fest. Mocha Fest is happening this weekend. I will be there on Saturday. Look out for me. I'll be talking to as many people as I possibly can in Mocha Fest. Also, this is a big week for us wrestling fans. It's Wrestlemania Weekend. So we got a lot of shows coming up for Wrestlemania Weekend. I'll probably throw in some stuff in Instagram as well. So look out for that. And next week is my Inkers Week, where I'll be talking to Scott Hanna on Monday and Keith Williams on Thursday, I believe it is. So we will have that show going on next week. Those two separate shows. So it's not going to be in the same show, but two separate shows. And finally, don't forget, Free Comic Book Day is May 7th, and we are planning to do something. I'm definitely planning to do something. Something will happen. That announcement will happen very shortly. So be on the lookout for that one. And it wouldn't be a show without me mentioning Squiggy's Dugout. So if you're ever looking for a comic book shop in New Rochelle, this is the place to go. Squiggy's Dugout. It is a great place to get your comic books, guys. With that said, I thank you. If you like this broadcast, subscribe to the channel, like, share, tell your friends, do all that. If you want to support the channel, I'm on Patreon as well as I have a GoFundMe at this moment. Those are the QR codes right there. And I'll see you next time in the IzzyVerse. I'll see you later this week, guys. Take care. Bye.